All right. Well, I am here with a longtime Infinite athlete, Taylor Lideen, who we've been working together since 2017 was, I think, the first time we started working together.
I'm 16 or 17, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So you were a youngin' back then. And then,
Yeah.
so since that time, last year, the Unbound XL champion, which was huge. Congratulations for that one.
Thanks,
And,
sir.
you've obviously had some pretty amazing results in the 24-hour scene, winning the 24 Hours of Old Pueblo as well. Um, and we have a lot of mutual friends, and we kind of actually had the opportunity to hang out not too long ago down in North Carolina, which was a really fun weekend as well.
That was awesome. Yeah. Got to see, I'm kind of a Toyota guy, so I got to see your FJ with Infinite Wrap and
Mhm.
learn that thing's been around the country multiple times. So yeah, it was really cool to finally meet up and hang out in person.
Yeah, that was an interesting weekend. So I got to I didn't know a lot about you. I mean, we met the one time and we had a good weekend together, but it wasn't like I really knew that much about you. And since that time, I've got the opportunity to find out more about you. And you're not the typical guy that I talk to that's the athlete. Because I mean, you got sprinkled with a magic pixie dust. You've got all the other stuff, but it seems like your career has evolved in a different way than a lot of other athletes has. So where did you start? You're a motocross guy. Is that where I read that?
Yeah, growing up in Phoenix, always riding motorcycles. And when I was younger, before I had my driver's license, my dad would take me to the motocross track on the weekends. And my dad at the time was riding mountain bikes because we lived right on South Mountain in Phoenix, Arizona. And he kept encouraging me, like, Taylor, instead of driving 45 minutes to the motorcycle track, why don't you start riding mountain bikes like I do? It's in your backyard. And I pushed and pushed and pushed off and just wasn't interested until one day finally kind of caved, went on a ride with him, and immediately was hooked. I couldn't believe it took me so long to kind of bite when he was throwing out the line the whole time.
It was that quick. It was that quick, really, because a lot of times, like, it takes a little while. But first time, was it the uphill? I mean, you had been going downhill a lot.
Yeah, it was everything. I got my start racing downhill. That was kind of the main focus with my dad. We traveled across the country racing downhill races. I just loved being outside and kind of the exploration aspect of it. So back then, my dad worked on the north side of the mountain. We lived on the south side of the mountain. He would ride to work and then ride home. And before school, I would ride halfway into work with him and ride halfway back before high school in the dark. And it was just something about being outside, exploring South Mountain, learning the trails on my own by myself, and sometimes with my dad. It's something I'd never experienced before. And it was something that I really needed at the time, looking back, kind of some alone time and really figuring things out by myself.
And you were how old? 16?
15, 16. Yeah, that was around that time.
Interesting. And so how that time in your life, 15, 16, was tumultuous, or how would you describe your life back then? Because I remember my life at 15, 16, and tumultuous is definitely the word I would use.
Yeah, I definitely was going through a lot of stuff in high school. Some pretty dark places. I was dealing with a lot of anxiety and depression, similar to what I've dealt with throughout my entire life. Back then, I really didn't tell anybody about what was going on. My mom knew a little bit. She was there through a lot of things and took me to see doctors and get on medication. And shortly after 16 is when I met my girlfriend, now wife, Mary. And she was really the first person that I'd opened up about all the things that were going on in my head. So I think the bike was a really healthy thing at that time to kind of get out there and use exercise as kind of a natural medication at the same time.
Yeah, it seems to be a theme with endurance athletes that we all should be in a 12-step program of one variety or other. And,
Yeah.
at 15, 16, I didn't have the tools to recognize what was going on with me at that time, because I can be really manic. I mean, I swing all over the place. And I didn't have the tools back then. It took me, I mean, in some ways, to being able to recognize that at 15, 16 years old is amazing. And then you're still a young guy, and your process that you went through. In a lot of ways, you're lucky you're dealing with it now, as opposed to what I did when I was 35 and 40 years old, which is, I'm not sure I've still dealt with it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's scary, right? Because there's not a handbook on how to do it properly, regardless of how old you are. So yeah, I definitely consider, I mean, I'm sure like you, having good friends and family is definitely beneficial. But yeah, we just kind of learn as we go.
Yeah, but the exercise component and why we thrive in that environment. The periods of long by yourself time is probably half of what got me interested in Ironman. Just that long period of being able to sit on a seat and just not think about anything but what you're doing it incorporated a lot of my personal growth. It helped a lot for me, just being able to apply myself in that direction, and then all the other stuff does tend to wash away a little bit. At least it wasn't for me.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. There's something about that really long grind, right? It's hard. It's really hard to explain to people what you get out of it. But there's definitely something going on inside that after one long ride, then it leads to the next, And you get on this roll. And in all honesty, it's addicting. It's kind of hard for me at least, it's kind of hard to control that at times.
It is, and us being the compulsive obsessive personalities, it's tough, because it impacts personal lives at the same time. If you were going to describe to somebody that's never done a gravel event before, what is it that it's like to do a 24-hour event? I mean, I know a lot of guys that do it. I think I might like to try it sometime, but I don't get it. How would you describe to a total newbie, what it is, why, what do you get out of it? What is it that draws you to that kind of event?
For me, it's the process of leading up to these long races, specifically like a 24. I love transitioning from kind of that rest period to that daunting build phase prior to something like 24 Hours in the Old Pueblo that happens in February, right? Like I recently just started that big build phase. For me, it's really scary to start that process, but you can see the end goal being the race. The race itself should be, quote unquote, the easy part, the fun part. Everything between are these little boxes. So you're checking these boxes day by day, week by week, month by month, leading up to the event. And I love that. I love the process of like waking up every day. All right, there's one more thing to do. Check that box. On to the next day. And it's this personal satisfaction of, all right, I finished that week, on to the next week, and trying to reach this goal being race day. And there's really no one else who can show up on race day for something like that other than yourself, right? You have really good support crew, but it's down to you to pedal your bike for 24 hours, and lots of things can happen in that time. And that's what makes it interesting and fun, I think.
What's your mindset on race day? I know I had a very certain point of view that I had to get into on race day. What's your sort of mantra? What do you have to get into on race day?
I can't be too obsessed about it, which I've learned about myself. I'm someone who can, if I get my mind on something, I become way too overly obsessed about it. Growing up, I felt like I had a lot of pressure on myself because my dad would attend races, and at the time, my dad was taking time away from work and paying for us to travel to these events. And so I always was like, oh man, he's the one doing this, so I need to provide something, right? I need to give back in a way. And what I thought was giving back was a result, which it wasn't healthy at all. But since then, Mary is my main support crew, and just over the past couple of years, I've had to really change my outlook on race day, and it's more about the process similar to the build, right? Race day is a process in itself. So focusing on that rather than just focusing about or getting too involved in the race itself, right? If it's 24 hours in the Old Pueblo, it's lap by lap. It's section by section. It's split by split, rather than breaking or thinking of it as a whole 24-hour time period. For me, that's pretty daunting.
Yeah. So you break it down into little bits.
Yeah. Even something as small as 5-minute section by 5-minute section, because 5-minute section done 5 seconds faster over 24 hours, that definitely adds up.
Yeah.
And a big focus in these long races is time in transition or time in the pits, right? So any time stopped, any zero added in the average speed is not good. So time stopped at night to put lights on or to put warm clothes on, you want to be as efficient as quick as possible. So at the start of the race, I think a lot about that. Like when that time comes, let's be efficient.
Yeah. I got an opportunity to pit for PUA at Worlds at 24 hours, and to watch what you guys do all night is jaw dropping. Just a machine. It's really cool. Who did you, other than your dad, who obviously was a big part of your life, and your wife obviously now, are there other athletes that kind of took you under their wing and said, hey, little fella, this is kind of how the world works, Do you have any of that? Because it's a good group of guys that you're with. I mean, the 24-hour group, as far as the people involved, are really, I like the group quite a bit. So
For
is there
sure.
somebody that took you under their wing?
Yeah. I, growing up, kind of even before I got into the sport, I really looked up to Infinite athlete as well, Josh Tostado. He was someone I had pictures on my wall before I really started doing 24s. And when he would race 24 hours in Moab prior to when I started racing, I would stay up kind of all night and watch the live tracking and the live timing of Josh. And looking back, it was kind of weird that like a teen was just watching this really relatively boring live tracking, because someone would come through, right? Josh would come through and there'd be well over an hour of nothing. You couldn't, I mean, it wasn't a live stream. It was just a live feed of tracking. So
a bunch of dirt in the middle of desert. That place is dusty. Boy.
Yeah. So funny enough, when I was getting into the sport, I sent Josh an email. One day I'd found his website and I sent him an email, and just kind of like any newbie kid, asked questions about getting into the sport, and never thinking that he would email back, because back then Josh was this, like, for me, he was like the Kobe Bryant to kids, right? He was he was my idol, and sure enough, he emailed back and was super helpful. And to me, that was like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. And yeah, Josh and I have stayed in close contact since then. We've raced each other plenty of times. So he played a big role. Also, Jonathan Davis played a really big role, who prior to me winning Old Pueblo in 18 and setting the course record, Jonathan actually had the course record at Old Pueblo. And he was my coach for quite some time when we lived in Colorado. So he played a big role in kind of steering me in the right direction in terms of training and riding, and learning a lot about the ultra scene.
Yeah. I guess you were hoping that Josh was going to get slower once he had kids. Not
true. Not true at all.
Yeah, Josh is one of my favorite people in the world. I mean, the dude I love him to death. He's a great guy. I had him I got to know Chris Etaw a bit too.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, it was. And I was just coming when we started Infinite. We worked with Chris for a couple of years, just at the very tail end of his thing, and he was an equally good person. I mean, really solid. I don't know if you've met him, but he's a really solid individual.
I used to watch that movie that came out.
Oh my God,
like,
dude,
his 24-hour world championship run, and I used to watch that on repeat. I remember I probably watched that movie 100 times.
Yeah, they tried to kill each other.
Yeah.
I mean, it was nothing. It was a gunfight.
Yeah, exactly.
Unbelievable. So what's your favorite race? I think I know the answer, but what's your favorite race?
24 Hours in the Old Pueblo.
Is it?
For sure. Yeah, growing up in Phoenix, I mean the race happens in Oracle, Arizona, just north of Tucson. So
Yeah.
if you're in Arizona in February, it's the talk of, and you're in cycling, it's the big deal. It's the big one.
And
Uh,
the camping's great, and it is a big party.
yeah, and like what other event do you go to that pretty much 90% or more people camp? Right? Growing up and going to all these downhill races with my dad, we did it in a camper, a small little camper, and we'd camp at every race.
I wish they do it more. I mean, there's a lot of races that I don't quite understand why the race promoters don't do that, because it promotes a party and everybody has fun. I mean, it's definitely
For sure. And
so.
it's kind of sad because you show up to some races, everybody goes to their own little hotel or Airbnb. Yeah. They only see each other on race day, and then we all like scatter after the race.
Yeah.
Versus if you're at an event like Old Pueblo, no, everybody's there days and days before the race.
Right.
Everybody's stuck during the race. Like you're not going anywhere.
You see the same person walk into the shower with their toothbrush and their bathrobe for about 5 days.
Yeah.
I know that guy.
Yeah, exactly.
That's funny. So what's your training like right now? So you've got a February date in mind, and you've been dealing with obviously some other medical stuff that, where are you on that? I know we talked about that in North Carolina. How's that progressing for you?
Things are really good right now.
Excellent.
I had some heart issues at Old Pueblo in February of this year.
Yeah.
Forced to take some time off the bike, do a lot of tests at the doctor. Wear a Holter monitor for 3 weeks, EKG, all that stuff. They did find an irregular heartbeat. At the time, they said, "Oh, it is there, especially induced by exercise, but we can't do anything about it at the moment." So it's few and far between. So we're just going to continue to monitor that. So yeah, continued throughout the season. Season was pretty rough, in all honesty. I couldn't buy a result if I wanted to. But then, yeah, ended the season in October, and then took 2 weeks off the bike completely when my wife and I went to Phoenix. Now we returned after a 3-week trip and slowly ramping things up. So right now, training is very basic and simple, right? Off the bike stuff, core work, some strength work, mobility work, but also 2-3 hour rides right now in the freezing cold here in Arkansas. Like we have this cold front like you guys coming through, and for me, it's just miserable. I cannot stand being cold. I'd rather ride in 110 degrees than ride in the high 30s.
That's what 5% body fat does to you. And also living in Arkansas, which is I already told you, we're going to go fly fishing at some point.
Yeah.
But yeah, you don't get enough cold weather to really get used to it.
Yeah, this is like we moved here a year ago in November of 21. And we didn't have our first real, I would say, cold day until it felt like January. I was riding in shorts and short sleeves, it seemed like pretty much through December of last year. So, yeah, I'm coming from Phoenix. We don't do well in the cold.
So, where is Taylor 10 years from now? Where do you see yourself?
I want to continue racing bikes. But more so, I've been learning a lot about myself in kind of my struggle with anxiety and depression, especially over the past 1 or 2 years. I've made improvements that I never thought I would, since kind of realizing that, hey, something's wrong. So I've been wired a little bit differently since 8 years old. I've kind of realized that. My goal is to continue to make progress each year. I used to fall into these episodes that we would call them, where things would just spiral out of control for a month or more of really, really depressive episodes. Some pretty scary things were going on, and that was happening multiple times a year, especially last year. That was a big wake-up call. If I look 10 years in the future, my goal is to really control those episodes and realize that I do have a lot more control when they happen. rather than when those things start, I used to just kind of throw up my hands and surrender to them. And that for me was not a healthy place to be in. So that's kind of what I'm focused on right now, is really, really getting a handle on my mental health. And I feel really confident and positive how things have gone this year, especially. This year has probably been the best year that I've had mentally, I would say, ever, that I can remember. Even though the races have not gone how I'd like. In fact, this was probably the worst year I've had in terms of results. But what makes me really happy is my mental health has been the best it's ever been, even with stuff like that.
Yeah, that's really interesting to think that you, from a professional standpoint, you didn't have a good year, but from a personal standpoint, it sounds like you actually probably had a great year.
Yeah. And moving to Northwest Arkansas with my wife and our 2 dogs was the best decision that we've ever made. We are so happy here. We were pretty nervous because we knew nothing about the state when we decided to move here. We had just been trying to purchase our first home, and Phoenix was pretty dang expensive. And we looked in Colorado, of course. We looked in Utah, same thing, expensive, and landed in Northwest Arkansas. And we could not be happier. The relationships that we built here, the community, the cycling infrastructure is huge. And I think that that's played a huge role in where I'm at with my mental health today. And yeah, I think a lot of people, when they say, where do you want to be in 10 years? And they have these grand plans. I'm a little embarrassed to say I don't have like this grand plan of, I want to accomplish X, Y, and Z. Right now, it's just take it day by day.
One day at a time.
Yeah. And just not get too overwhelmed with things, right? Yeah. Don't look at, for me, if I look at the big picture too often, that becomes really overwhelming.
Yeah.
So just get a grasp on things.
Yeah, I have to be careful about getting too high or too low. So I try and kind of keep things in the middle, because I sort of always look at it, there's always the equal and opposite reaction. So if I get flying too high, there's always going to be the downside of that. So as neutral as I can stay, that helps me quite a bit.
That's really interesting, because I had a hard time explaining that to people. I used to dread going on vacations because the vacation was this high, and I knew coming home from the vacation, it wasn't like, dang, I'm bummed to go back to work on Monday or just get back in the swing of things. Like, I would fall into this post-vacation blues that was like, it was really hard to explain to people. This really dark place. And sounds like, we can relate on that end.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I didn't figure I beat the crap out of myself until I was 35 years old, just thinking I was weak. That was, I'm a child of the 60s and the 70s, which is that suck it up, rub some dirt in it, get out there,
Yeah.
Men don't cry. It's that whole mantra, which works to some degree, but at a certain point, you're forced to deal with some certain things. But I've kind of come to the point now where I look at that as a strength, because I know some of my creativity that I have, which can get really is because of that. And so I think some of what you are able to do as an athlete is because you're wired the way you are. And so some ways it's a detriment, but it's a gift. And that's kind of where I've evolved to, is that I embrace it. I try and work with it, but that's kind of where I am. Talking about, for me personally, that I have to be careful about getting too high or too low. I mean, I can get pretty manic sometimes, and that's a benefit for my creativity. So I have to kind of visualize that is not like a superpower, but hey, that's kind of my part of my strength, and it makes me who I am. And I think that some of that certainly transforms into being a professional endurance athlete. It just, I think it gives you focus. I think it gives you a lot of inner strength that other people may not have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think you're right. I think it helps because I feel like I've spent a lot of time inside my head in a really negative place And a lot of these races, you are forced to go to those places. And so it doesn't feel so foreign when you get there. It feels somewhat familiar. Obviously, the negative side that you go to in racing is a lot more overall positive than it is off of the bike when episodes come up or these extreme lows. So yeah, it does feel familiar in some ways. So I think that's why it's not so shocking.
Is there a cleansing component to just beating the crap out of yourself?
I think so. Yeah, it's like where the one thing that I like about it is you have complete control over it, right? So when you're done and you're totally drained and totally exhausted, there's something to be said about, I willed my way through something like that. I forced myself to do it, and I could have stopped at any time, but I kept going, persevering through all that.
That's awesome. Would you mind talking about ketamine at all, and sort of some of the benefits that sounds like you've gotten from that? Because
Yeah.
I've never heard of that, never even heard of it before.
Yeah, it's relatively new, and I think it's gaining a lot of popularity. It's kind of similar to people using like psilocybin for therapeutic uses.
Yep.
When things were really bad in the spring of 2021, we went to a professional in Scottsdale, where we were in Phoenix at the time, and I think that day we were there for close to 8 hours before we could do my first treatment of ketamine. Really interesting, and it was really scary at the time, but ketamine was long used as a painkiller. And in the professional medical setting, it's administered through an IV. They take your weight each time you go there, so they administer the proper dosage based on your weight every time. And I would probably be butchering the definition of what it does because I'm obviously not a doctor, but there's certain NMDA chemicals in your brain or structures in your brain that it helps rewire, especially the depressive side of things. And for me, going through 5 treatments was incredibly beneficial. In fact, after the first treatment, I noticed a huge difference, a positive impact on the depression that I was going through. The anxiety didn't really do much for the anxiety, but the depression was huge. And it was interesting. I mean, I'm glad that Mary was there for each of those treatments because they were pretty intense. But yeah, for me personally, they worked incredibly well.
Has she noticed a difference?
Yeah. Yep. So pairing the ketamine therapy and then going through counseling. At that time, I was going through some pretty heavily counseling. So I was going, I think, 3 times a week paired with the ketamine therapy. And then at the time I was getting back on antidepressants and medication. And I really think pairing all 3 of those things really helped me come out of a huge hole.
What advice do you have for somebody that may be going through that? Because people are going to hear it, and
Yep.
You've been there, done that, and kind of are coming out the other side. And I think that's
it's really the one thing that makes me so passionate about this is I'm really fortunate to have a good support system. First one being Mary, my wife. It really, really makes me sad to realize that some people out there just don't have any support at all, right? So the hardest part for me was speaking up about these things and telling the person closest to me, Mary, my wife. And I realized that some people just don't have those people in their lives. So from what I learned personally was speaking up was the hardest part, but also speaking up was one of the things that helped me the most, paired with the professional help. So I think finding someone that you really trust and just being an open book to them.
so the process of being open and talking about it.
Yeah, really finding someone that you can truly, truly trust, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, for me, there was no shortage of that. And I almost feel guilty in a way because there's so many people out there that just they don't have that.
Yeah.
They don't have that available to them.
Yeah. You're certainly a blessing that you have that. Are there 12-step groups for I would assume that there's some type of community that you could seek.
There's a lot of communities you can find online. One really cool community that I'm working with is called Go for Graham. They're based out of Colorado, so it's really cool because they're helping shred the stigma surrounded around mental health using outdoor activities. So bike, running, hiking, whatever it is. It's been really fun and eye-opening to team up with them.
And what's the name of that again?
Go for Graham.
Go for Graham. All right.
Yep.
That sounds awesome. Very
cool.
It's
super cool.
Neat. So what's on the agenda looking for next year? I know you got some races. What are your A races and B races coming up? Looking for next year's calendar.
The big one is always 24 Hours in the Old Pueblo to start the year.
Yeah.
I feel like you'd think that I'd learn after how many times I've fallen flat on my face at that event. Like maybe don't go back, but I can't not go back. For me, that's the most enjoyable event of the year, I think.
Yeah.
So we'll start the year.
I was watching a bunch of video yesterday on that race, the run up, and I think it was one of Josh's that it was just a one lap, and I pretty much watched the whole lap. It's just the course is so awesome.
The course is really good. Yeah, it's super heavy in terms of single track. I know it like the back of my hand, living down in that area for most of my life. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, we'll start the year off at Old Pueblo. It's a little odd because it's a really odd time of year to dig that big of a hole physically, right? Mm-hmm. In February, and if all goes to plan in February, you're pretty destroyed after that event. So trying to come out with some fitness gain and not be totally destroyed is tricky. But yeah, I have a lot of goals and ambitions at that race in 2023. So nice. Big focus there. And then seems like we'll be in Arizona a lot early on, which almost directly following Old Pueblo is BWR Scottsdale, which not sure if people know, but Infinit's going to play a role there.
Yeah, we're kind of going to be teaming up with that ride next year. That's not public, so we'll put that out. Yeah, okay. So that's very cool. We're excited. We're going to be doing that series, so we'll be there, and I think we're going to be down in February too for the 24. We got to get down. It's been 10 years since I've been there, so I want to get there for the race just to support.
Yep, yeah. It's a long drive from Ohio for you guys, but if you're going to be down there anyways, you might as well make a big trip out of it.
Exactly. So that's cool. So you're going to be doing some gravel as well?
Yeah, some gravel, and then big focus next year will be the Lifetime Grand Prix as well. Obviously need to be accepted into the series, so we'll put my bid in here in a couple weeks. But yeah, I would really like some redemption at that Lifetime Grand Prix series. Seems like I couldn't buy a result this year. Yeah, I mean, you can call it bad luck. I think you kind of make your own luck in some ways, but it was a frustrating year to say the least.
Yeah, you had so many variables. I mean, it's just that was a lot to deal with for the year. So hopefully, you come out of this thing bigger, badder, stronger, and you come out of it next year and you have a great year.
Yeah, we'll see. All positivity for sure. Like I said, I've had the best year mentally I think I've ever had. So that's been really helpful. It's been really cool to actually enjoy a season full of racing, even though things have just been, in my opinion, pretty horrible and on the result sheet, but still having a ton of fun and not being in a negative headspace after the year.
All right. Well, yeah, I mean, race results aren't everything. And that's, I mean, from a company standpoint, that's not why we're involved with people like you. I mean, to be honest with you, you guys are such stewards of the sport, and it's really appreciated. So you're awesome, dude. So I appreciate the time very, very much.
Thanks, man.
You're great for the sport. And I look forward to maybe pitting for you down in February. How's that sound?
That would be awesome. Mary would love some company down there. I know it gets quiet, cold, and lonely for her during the night at Old Pueblo. So yeah, keeping her company would be awesome. It'd be a pleasure to see you down there.
All right, buddy. We'll do it soon. Thanks again so much.
Thank you for having me on, man.
All right, you too.